Hey everyone, welcome back to The Mostly True Adventures of Homer P. Figg by Rodman P. Philbrick. Today we're on chapter 34, called One Small Hill. When we last left, Homer had found Harold at the Battle of Gettysburg, but rather than have been being promoted, Harold has actually been arrested for mutiny. All my life, I never knew Harold to be scared or ashamed, and seeing him this way is like stepping backward off a cliff, or discovering the world's gone inside out and upside down. I sit next to where he crouches in the wagon, and I try not to look at his black eye, or notice the sickly, unwashed smell of him. "Homer, what are you doing here?" he asks, his voice catching. "Thought I'd take a stroll behind the barn, and this is where I ended up." I give him a playful nudge. "I come looking for you, silly. To tell you it was nothing but a trick, making you enlist in the army. Squint sold you for a substitute and kept the money. They fooled you into enlisting. It ain't legal." Harold hangs his head. His voice is so small I have to lean in close. "Don't matter now, Homer. I went and done it, and will be court-martialed." "What happened?" I ask. "Did you run from the bullets? Did you run from the cannon? From men with bayonets?" My brother shakes his head. Somewhere in all his sorrow there comes a slight chuckle. "Disobeyed my squad sergeant. I swear he's worse than Squint." "Is that what happened to your eye?" He nods. "At first I liked it, being in the regiment. The fine uniform and the drilling, shooting rifles, 3 good meals a day, sleeping in tents. I even liked the marching and folks cheering as we went by. But I never did like the sergeant telling me what to do without so much as a please or thank you, and one day I told him so. When he objected, I slung him down in the mud, just like I did to Squint. It got worse from there," he adds. "He took it upon himself to make my life a misery, said I was swamp trash, not fit to serve." "So you ran away?" "Didn't get far, as you can see." "What will happen?" "It doesn't matter, little brother. I am disgraced. You must leave here and forget that you ever knew me." "Don't be stupid. That sergeant's knocked the sense right out of you." "I mean it, Homer. You need to get away from here. Whatever happened yesterday, whatever you might have seen, it's nothing to what will happen today and tomorrow, and every day until one side or the other is defeated." "It couldn't be worse than yesterday," I tell him. "Oh, yes, it could. The Union has 90,000 men, and we'll use them all. The rebels a similar number. Can't you hear the artillery pounding away? It started already." "Oh, it ain't fair," I say. "Fair doesn't signify. I swore an oath and disobeyed. I must be punished." "Do they hang mutineers?" "Sometimes, mostly not. Likely they'll send me to prison." Up to now I've been trying to act cheerful, pretending things ain't so bad. But the prospect of Harold being sent off to prison in disgrace makes me gloomy and quiet. Probably they won't let me go off to prison with him. I'll have to visit and smuggle in a saw so that he can make his escape. Then we'll run away as far as we can get. As far as the Western Territories, maybe, where land is free and nobody cares what happened in the war. We'll grow so much corn that we'll grow fat as ticks and build us a fine house with a fireplace and windows and a proper privy. We'll fish in mountain streams for trout as big as dogs, and someday we'll sit in rockers on the porch and reminisce about the silly old days when the stupid rotten sergeant blacked his eye and how we made our great escape. Maybe on horseback or in a silk balloon. I ain't decided which yet." "Well, it'll be all right," I tell him. "Our dear mother always said things work out for the best." Harold gives me a sorrowful look. "You were barely 4 years old when Mother passed. How can you know what she said or what she believed?" "I know because you told me." He nods to himself as if he already knew what I would say. "I am sorry, Homer. I have let you down." "Don't be silly. Squint sold you into the army. It ain't your fault." "You don't understand. he says, sounding mournful. I let it happen. I knew it was a sham, and I could have said so before I joined the regiment. But I wanted to be shut of the farm and our hard life. I wanted to breathe air that had never been dirtied by Squint and Leach. Oh, I say, there's worse. He hesitates, then takes a deep breath and continues. For once in my life, I wanted not to have to take care of you, not to be your brother and your mother and your father all rolled into one. I wanted out, Homer. I saw my chance and took it. Poor Harold looks so miserable I can't hardly stand it. Besides, the things he's telling me don't exactly come as a big surprise. I sort of knew it all along, that he wanted to get away from Squint and not to be always having to look after his little brother. I'm actually really glad that Rodman Philbrick put that paragraph in there, because after what Harold says, it feels really devastating, because we know how hard Homer's been looking for him. But the fact that Homer kind of knew that and just chose not to share that with us makes it feel so much better. I say, well, it don't matter, because you don't have to take care of me no more. It's my turn to take care of you. Harold studies me and shakes his head and smiles a little. How'd you get here, really? A boy your age that never left the farm. Well, I'm about to tell him my story of my true adventures and all the fun and sorrows I had along the way, when an officer starts shouting out commands. Men of the 20th Maine, move out. We're shifting to the left. Keep formation, keep formation. The guards kick me out of the prisoner wagon, but chase me no farther than a few yards. It's easy enough to follow as the regiment picks up and moves along with the rest of the brigade. There are thousands of soldiers below the crest of the hill awaiting orders. Men from Maine and New York, Pennsylvania and Vermont, Massachusetts and Connecticut, Michigan and Illinois, and just about everywhere in the northern states. The sound of rifle and artillery fire coming from the other side of the ridge is more or less continuous, and the men seem eager to join the fight. This is the day, they tell one another. Today we stand our ground. Today we turn the tables on Robert E. Lee. Today we win the war. I feel like tugging on sleeves and saying, don't be in such a hurry. The bullets are faster than you. But I keep my mouth shut, my eyes on the prisoner wagon, trying to scheme up a plan to break Harold out of his confinement. A little while later, I see the wounded being carried back from the top of the hill. And it comes to me that maybe being a prisoner and mutineer ain't such a bad thing to be. Nobody's shooting at them. Could be worse. Then Worse himself comes charging up on a big gray horse. Colonel Joshua Lawrence Chamberlain, the young commander of the 20th Maine, all fitted out with his sword and pistols and his fancy big mustache, and his eyes glowing like he's been to heaven and seen the other side. Men of the 20th, look to me. See that small hill? He points with his sword. We must hold that with our lives. It guards the left of the Union Army and cannot be allowed to fall into rebel hands. Every man on the double, run for the hill and take position. Follow the flag, quickly now. He makes to wheel away and then thinks better of it. Instead, he sidles up to the prisoners and shows them the flat of his sword, tapping it against his boot. Gentlemen, those willing to fight will get a good word from me. Obey your orders, and I'll do my best to get the charges dropped. To my dismay, the prisoners stand as one, including my brother, Harold Figg, begging to be allowed to fight. The guards release them, and they dust away the M so cruelly chalked upon their uniforms. The prisoners and the guards grab rifles and cartridge boxes and run for the hill, following the flag of the 20th Maine. All is confusion, but I manage to get to Harold just as he picks up a rifle. Now's our chance, I say. There's no one to stop us. We can run for it. We'll be miles away before they notice. Harold looks at me like I got two heads. I gave my word, he says. Words won't stop bullets, I say, as he wrenches himself loose from my grasp. Words won't keep the shells from exploding. Words won't stop you getting killed and leaving me alone in this world. He shoves me to the ground. Stay there, he orders me. Crawl under the wagon and keep yourself safe. I will see you after the battle, Homer, after the fight is done. Then he's running up the hill, a rifle in one hand and a cartridge pouch in the other. Harold, stop! He won't stop. He keeps on going, running toward the sound of gunfire. What choice do I have? I haven't come all this way for nothing. So I follow my brother up the hill, into the fight, into the Battle of Gettysburg. Chapter 35 is called Even When They're Dead. What happens during this chapter is probably the most famous part of the Battle of Gettysburg, which might be the most famous part of the Civil War. So everything that happens during this scene really happens. Remember, it's historical fiction. So, of course, there's no Homer and Harold Figg involved in the fight, but everything that happens around them really does happen. Chapter 35, Even When They're Dead. The top of the little hill is strewn with rocks and boulders and a few spindly trees. The men from the 20th Maine spread out along the ridge, quickly finding shelter among the rocks. From there, they may fire down upon the enemy and still be afforded some small protection. They don't have long to wait. 10 minutes after occupying the hill, a full regiment of Alabama men attack from below, waving their regimental flag. Suddenly, gray uniforms swarm among the rocks and into the open, surging upward with that terrible cry that's called a rebel yell. The ki-yi-yip-yip of the rebel yell being part ways an owl-like screech and part ways a high-pitched yelp that makes your skin crawl if you happen to be on the receiving end. The bullets start flying before I can locate Harold or find a place to hide. Bullets spitting off rocks and scudding up the dirt and making little smacking noises as they hit skinny trees that are too small to hide behind. Everywhere I turn, there are more bullets striking all around, like hornets swarming. Snick, snick, snick. Finally, Harold scoots out from behind his rock and drags me to safety. "What are you doing, you little fool? You want to be killed? Is that it?" he asks, panting. "I want to go home." Harold grunts, then takes aim between the rocks and fires his Springfield rifle. His leather cartridge pouch lies open at his side, and he swings the rifle around, tears the paper cartridge in his teeth, rams it down the muzzle, swings the rifle back around, inserts the primer cap, and cocks the hammer, all as quick as you can count. Then he takes careful aim and fires and does it all over again. There are 40 cartridges in his leather pouch, which means when he fires 37 more times, he'll be out of ammunition. Figure 20 minutes or less if he keeps up to speed. "Where are you going?" he cries. "To get more ammunition." And that's what I do, scampering down the back slope of the hill out of the line of fire. I follow the others and locate the powder wagons, hoisting a wooden ammunition box that looks like a little casket, and dragging it up to where Harold is still loading and firing his rifle, steady as a clock, a bullet fired every count of 20. After seeing that Harold is well supplied, I make myself useful hauling ammunition to some of the others who are strung out all the way to the southern end of the little hill and under vicious fire from the troops below. Time and again, the Alabama men scream out their wild rebel yell and swarm up the hill, only to be turned back at the last moment, punished by the men of the 20th Maine, who hold their ground, hunkered down among the rocks like smoking barnacles, refusing to let go. For an hour or more, the bullets fly. Men are wounded, men scream, men die, but still the bullets fly. Colonel Chamberlain is everywhere. He strides along the ridge in direct line of the rebel sharpshooters firing from below, ordering where his men should be placed and how they might best repel the next desperate charge of the troops from Alabama. Bullets crease the air around him, close enough to part his hair, but he never flinches from his purpose. Later, I heard he was a college professor who knew nothing of war excepting what he'd read in books, But that fateful day upon the little hill, he seems to be Napoleon himself, never in doubt as to what must happen next. He orders where the men should move, when the lines should be extended, and when the wounded should be dragged back to safety and carried by stretcher away from the withering fire. The bodies of the fallen have to be left where they fall, to be retrieved when the battle concludes, if ever it does. Even when they're dead, bullets make them flinch. Seeing me scurrying along with a load of ammunition, Colonel Chamberlain pauses in his purposeful stride and says, "You there, boy, do you know the risk you take?" "Yes, sir." "Very good, carry on," he commands, "and keep your head down." Then his attention is drawn elsewhere as one of his officers falls, wounded in the neck, and he must see to a replacement. In the first few minutes of the assault, the rebels almost gain the top of the hill, where they're met with pistol shot and sword. A few soldiers fight hand to hand, rolling among the rocks, each one desperate to kill the other man, but most of the casualties are inflicted at a distance of 30 yards or so. An Alabama man will emerge from cover, firing as he tries to gain a few yards, and a Maine man will stand up, exposed to the withering hail of bullets, and take aim at the Alabama man, and most times one or the other will fall wounded or dead, sometimes both. All to gain advantage on a rocky little spur of a hill that happens to stand at the far end of the line, where the Confederates hope to sweep around and crush the Union Army from both sides. A small hill shrouded in gray gun smoke and running with the blood of the wounded and the dead. The steady hail of lead chops little bits out of the trees like they're being attacked by small invisible axes. I keep down, like Harold and the Colonel suggested, and I find myself a good boulder to hide behind. All the ammunition has been taken from the wagons and distributed. It can't last forever. The way the men are using it up, each taking 2 or 3 shots a minute, but for now the gunfire spits and pops like a full load of popcorn in a hot pan of grease. There comes a lull when only a few guns are popping off, and I hear Harold call out for more ammunition. "All gone," an officer shouts back. "Find cartridges where you can." Already they're borrowing cartridge cases from the many who have fallen. The dead men don't object. In my hiding place, curled up small, I'm praying that the cartridges will run out soon so we can fall back. It comes to this. I care not if the rebels take the hill. There are 1,000,000 hills in Pennsylvania. Let them have this one if they want it so bad. A little distance away, half obscured by the clouds of gun smoke, the colonel confers with his officers. From what I can see of their faces, the news must be very grim indeed. Good, I'm thinking. Sound your retreat. An army can't fight without bullets, can it? We're outnumbered, outgunned, and outfought. The only sensible thing to do is run for it. Then, clear as a bell that tolls through the fog, comes his order. "Fix bayonets!" he roars. All down the line, soldiers eagerly slip bayonets onto the muzzles of their empty rifles and ready themselves for what happens next. Ahead of me, crouching behind his rock, my brother Harold shakes his head at me. "Homer, get back!" he shouts above the din. "Go home! Save yourself!" Then Colonel Chamberlain's voice booms out, louder than the crack of artillery. "Charge!" he commands, lifting high his sword. Harold leaps to his feet and follows him down the hill into the guns of the enemy. To this day, I cannot say what made me follow my brother down the hill. It was not ignorance, because I had seen what war does and hated it. It was not courage, because fear of dying made me scream out loud. All I know is, there I was, running after Harold and begging him to take shelter. And as I come over the top of the hill, the air itself is hot enough to catch a fire from the heat of flying lead. To my shock, no more than 50 feet separates us from the enemy. Measured in blood, it might as well be 100 miles. All around me, men are charging downhill, eyes wide in the madness of killing, teeth snapping like dogs at the scent of death. Fast as I'm running over that rough ground, I can't seem to catch up to Harold. Soldiers on either side of him fall like rag dolls, but he keeps on going. Just ahead of him is the burly sergeant with the regimental flag, the one who cussed Harold and said he was swamp trash. The sergeant stumbles, clutching at his stomach, and the flag starts to fall. Without breaking stride, Harold drops his empty rifle and seizes the flag from the wounded sergeant. It happened. Harold, no! Now all rebel eyes and rebel guns will be upon him. My brother holds up the flag as he advances, leaning into the lead-filled air as if he's leaning into warm summer rain. Harold, get down! I scream. Get down or be killed! Holes appear like stars in the billowing flag, but still he will not take shelter. I search for a rock to throw at him, to bring him to his senses, but the first thing my groping hand encounters is the fallen sergeant who passed the flag to Harold. He lies on his side, grinning at his pain, hands clawing at his wounded stomach. I want to ask him why he blacked my brother's eye, and if he's sorry now, but it don't seem right to ask while he's busy dying. Instead, I lift the pistol from his holster and take aim, intending to fire at Harold's feet to get his attention. I pull the trigger. The bullet strikes the ground. Harold falls. At first, I think he's finally been struck by rebel lead, and then I see what has happened. My own shot has splintered away a chunk of rock that has stuck itself in his leg like a dart in a board. As Harold falls, he tries to keep the flag upright. Without thinking, I drop the sergeant's pistol, and somehow the flag ends up in my hands and my brother lying at my feet. By rights, I should toss aside the flag and drop to the ground and try to get under the flying lead. But something in me won't let go. Now that the flag is in my hands, it don't seem right to let it fall on bloody ground. A dumb idea. Dumb enough to get me killed, but there it is. The strangest thing is happening. All around me, all down the hillside, rebel soldiers are throwing down their rifles and surrendering, begging mercy from the crazy men with the bayonets, men mad enough to charge without a shot to fire, into the face of certain death, men who will not give up, men who would rather die than be defeated. Beneath me, Harold is groaning and trying to pry loose the sliver of stone embedded in his leg. I'm sorry he's hurt, but glad that he is alive. Then I notice that not all the Alabama soldiers have surrendered. I notice because one of them has risen from the ground with his sword in both hands, his eyes moving from the flag to me as if deciding what to strike first, the hated Yankee flag or the boy holding it. He hesitates. At that moment exactly, Colonel Joshua Lawrence Chamberlain appears and aims his pistol at the swordman's head with a steady hand. Surrender or die, he suggests. The man drops the sword and falls to his knees. I'll take the flag, the colonel says. See to your brother. Chapter 36. What happened in the end. That day the battle ends for us, but not for others. All that night, as I waited in the surgeon's tent with Harold, the wounded were carried from the field. Supplies were brought in, meals were cooked or eaten cold, artillery cannons were shifted into new positions. Men sang and cried and waited for the dawn. And when the sun rose, it did not seem so bad at first. A few skirmishes, a cannonade or two. It was as if the rebels wanted only to give us a little slap to remind us that they had not been truly beaten. Then, early that afternoon, the Confederate artillery began to fire in earnest, hurling thousands of explosive shells upon the Union positions, and the earth itself began to shake as if some mad giant was stamping his feet in rage. Our tent was more than a mile from the field of battle, but the shaking was so bad that water sloshed in the glass and dust rose from the ground. One of the surgeons shouted that it was like an earthquake, but unlike an earthquake, it did not stop. Eventually, of course, it did stop, and the Confederates, thinking that the Union artillery had been pounded into oblivion, launched an infantry attack into the very middle of the Union forces. They sent almost 13,000 men marching in line across a mile of open ground. And in that bloody mile, pounded by Union artillery and hundreds of Union sharpshooters, half of the Confederates were killed or wounded. Among those who participated in that doomed assault was Reginald Robertson Crockett, the gentleman spy, the man I knew as Professor Fleabottom. Having bribed his way free of his jailers, paying them with the golden buttons on his coat, he rode hard for the battlefield and soon perished there, as his famous ancestor did at the Alamo, fighting to the last man. That night, Robert E. Lee and his rebel army fled south and would never again set foot on northern soil. A few days after the battle, while the dead were still being buried in the fields and meadows of Gettysburg, and some of the fallen officers shipped home in boxes, Colonel Chamberlain came to see us. Harold's wound was healing nicely, so it seemed, and the colonel had sent a telegraph message to Pine Swamp, Maine, and received a reply. Harold's age was proved as 17. "You are released from your service as being too young to enlist," the colonel informed him. Better words I never heard, although Harold was none too pleased. He wanted to keep on fighting once his leg had healed. Before he left us, the colonel turned to me and asked why I did it. Why did I stand my ground and hold the flag? "You're only a boy, and you could have run away with no shame," he says, fixing his cold blue eyes on me. "What made you stand?" Try as I might, I could not think of an answer that day. And all these years later, I still cannot say why I did not run. Surely I wanted to, but something made me stay. "Well, if we're still fighting in 2 years' time," the colonel said, "I will send for both of you." In 2 years' time, the long and terrible war finally came to an end, and we were never again called upon to fight. Instead, we wandered north, relying upon each other, working wherever we could, on farms and in small factories, and searching all the while for a medicine show as good as Professor Fleabottom's. We never did find one. Eventually, Jebediah Brewster located us in our wanderings and took us in and made us feel at home and was made our legal guardian. By then, the slaves had been freed of their bondage, and the Brewster mines were opened up again, bringing precious stones out of the dirt and rocks. Mr. Brewster says me and Harold are like tourmaline. We come in dirty, but we wash up shiny, and he is proud to call us his kin and make us his heirs. It was him that suggested I write down my true adventures, so if you hate this book, put the blame on Jebediah Brewster, not on me. One more thing I got to say about my big brother Harold, and that's what happened after the battle at Gettysburg. At first, his wound healed, and for a few weeks it seemed like his leg would be saved. Then one day an infection set in, and it swelled up blue and nearly killed him. Nothing to cure it but the knife and the saw. My brother lost his leg. He still feels it sometimes, like the ghost of a limb that used to be. And when that happens, he'll smile and say, "Remember when we were boys? Remember how you saved my life by trying to kill me? Remember how you stood your ground, a small boy at 12 that never owned a pair of shoes? Don't you worry, little brother. Don't you shed a tear. It wasn't you that took my leg. It was the war." I think in some ways it's like that for all of us, living with the ghosts of things that used to be or never were. We're all of us haunted by yesterday, and we got no choice but to keep marching into our tomorrows. Keep marching, boys and girls. Keep marching. Yours truly, mostly, Homer P. Figg.